this. Okay, let's get started. Tonight, what I want to do is focus on another one of our unsung heroes. This time, who I want to focus on is Zeresh. Now, Zeresh is the wife of Haman, and we don't know a lot about Zeresh, except for the fact that she finds her way into a few interesting midrashim and stories, as well as we find just a few lines of text in the entire Megillah. She really defines the theme of our entire series here, of literally being a supporting actor, because she does a lot of supporting of her husband. But before we jump, I want to just show you an amazing commentary here in box number 1 for Rabbeinu Bechaya. So this is taken from Bamidbar, chapter 16, Perek Zayin, and it goes as follows. So Shnei Ashrim Gedolim Hayu Ba'olam. Achad b'Yisrael v'achad bomot. There are two men of great wealth in the entire world, and these are who they were. One was Jewish and one was not. Korach b'Yisrael, Haman be'umot ha'olam. Korach, we know Korach, as we'll read about him in the coming weeks, who led a rebellion against Moshe and ultimately gets swallowed up by the earth. And Haman, who we should hopefully be familiar with at this point, who is the negative character here in the Megillah. Now, Shneim shamu l'neshotehem v'naflu. L'neshotehem v'naflu. They both of them, unfortunately, listened to their wives, and because they listened to their wives, they fell. In other words, they fell from their perch and ultimately died. Haman shama leitzat ishto v'nafal. We see that Haman listens to his wife's advice, who tells him, go make this big tall tree. We're going to see that in a minute. And to hang Mordechai, and everything bad happens to him. What about Korach? So Korach, Korach also listens to what his wife tells him. And the story goes that Korach was learning in the Beis Medrash of Moshe Rabbeinu, learning all these halachos. He comes home one day, and his wife says, well, what did you learn today? So he says, oh, we're learning the halachos of tzitzis. We're learning all about techelat and the blue strings and the blue strands. And his wife says, well, you think this Moshe is something that's so great? Let me ask you a very simple question. What would happen if the entire garment itself was made out of techelat? What would the halacha be? And so Moshe hears it and says, well, you still need to do it. You still need to put techelat. And Moshe says, yes. And Korach's wife said, that's crazy. The whole garment is techelat. Why would you need such a thing? And the rest is history as we know it. Because after that point, Korach sees that gets the sense that perhaps Moshe is mocking him, and leads a rebellion with Ruvain's tribe, members of the tribe of Ruvain, which was the tribe next door to him in the encampment, and obviously they all die. And so the question I wonder is whether or not the take-home message when it comes to Zeresh is simply that one should just not listen to their wives. You'll notice my wife is nowhere to be seen right now, thank God. But is this the take-home message for Zeresh? Like, if we were to say, what are we supposed to learn from Zeresh? What is she included in the story? What does she add? Is the answer to teach us the important lesson that we're not supposed to listen to our wives. Now, I like to think that in our enlightened society that is not the case. But in order for us to better understand Zeresh's contribution and what it is that we're meant to learn from her, we have to dig a little bit deeper. We have to understand what actions she took. We have to understand why she took them. And when she did advise her husband, what was her intention behind that advice? Now, again, lest you think that Zeresh is not such a significant player in the Megillah, we sing Shoshanas Yaakov at the end of the Megillah, and we sing the song. This is usually the moment when everybody is shuffling out. And when I say sing, I really mean like we kind of shuffle through it, and like two guys sing it. Everybody talks and starts thinking where they're going to get their hamantashen from. We don't do a lot of singing of Shoshanas Yaakov. Well, at least in my previous shuls. Hopefully it'll be different here in TRM. But notice the end song, right? This should be familiar to some of us. So Shoshanas Yaakov, Salav Samecha, Berotam Yachet Ches Mordechai. Such excitement. We see Mordechai wearing the royal blue. And notice the end here. How does it end? Arur Haman, Asher Bikeshel Abdi. Cursed it is Haman, cursed it is Haman, who wanted to do nothing more than to kill, than to destroy us. Baruch Mordechai Yudi. We should bless Mordechai. What does Mordechai do? He's one of the saviors of the story. Arura Zeresh Eshet Mafchidi. Cursed be Zeresh, the wife of Haman, who terrified me. Brucha Esther Badi, and Esther should be blessed. So we understand this notion of comparing Haman and Mordechai. They had a lot of beef, if you will. They really knocked heads consistently. But to throw in Esther and Zeresh, how is Zeresh to be elevated in such a significant way that she herself should be a person who should be severely cursed? And so for that, to understand Zeresh, what I want to do is actually spend a few minutes working our way through the Psukim and try to understand exactly what's going on. So we're going to do a little bit of like a more in-depth text study, and please feel free to interject or unmute yourself if you have specific questions or something jumps out to you on the pasuk, because I find that we spend a lot of time, we know the story on a high level, but when we actually get into the nuts and bolts and read the psukim themselves, sometimes it doesn't quite add up the way that we might remember. So the Megillah says as follows. This is Perek Hey. Vayitze Haman bayomahu sameach v'tov lev. Haman is feeling pretty good. He's walking around, he's strutting around. Haman and Mordechai b'shar melech lo kam lo zamenu. But then what happens is he sees Mordechai, sitting b'shar hamelech. He's sitting there in the palace of the king, right in the shar in the gate. V'lo kam lo zamenu. Haman is this big important person. You're supposed to stand up for him. And what happens? Mordechai doesn't move an inch. Vaymelei Haman am Mordechai chema. Haman is filled with rage at him. I just want to pause for a minute and just ask the question, which I don't know the right answer to, is, and maybe this is something to explore in future years, but is Mordechai justified for not standing up to Haman? I mean, think about the rest of the story. If Mordechai stands up to Haman, a lot of the bad things that happen to the Jewish people, including their impending destruction and doom, don't happen. Mordechai, one person has the power. All he has to do is stand up for Haman, and the rest of it goes away. But you can imagine he doesn't. What happens? Haman gets so angry, he comes home. He comes in, and who does he bring with him? He brings his friends, his wife Zeresh. Also want to just point out something here. What's the implication of this pasuk yud here? That he brings his ohavav vet Zeresh ishto. Does this mean that Zeresh was not one of the people who was not one of his friends? Ohavav means loved ones, right? He brings his loved ones. Oh, and also his wife Zeresh, right? So like, what is the relationship that they have? I think is something interesting. But we see that he brings in all these friends, and then his wife Zeresh. Haman tells him all the great things, the children he has, and how the king has made him so high and so important. He's got he's the number 2. Not only that, he says, but Queen Esther, the fairest of them all, she's bringing me to the feast. And I'm the only other invitee besides the king. That obviously says a lot about me, right? Next pasuk, but none of it is worth anything to me. This is like an amazing homily in drasha. A person could have everything in the world, and he knows he has everything, but sometimes the smallest thing, it's like the princess and the pea, the smallest thing can literally just take everything away. It means nothing to me. When I see Mordechai, in that moment, it eats me alive. Nothing, I can't get past it. This poor Mordechai won't stand up for me. So what happens? So Zeresh, his wife, and all of his friends and beloved friends say, Yasu eitz kavua chama, go make a gallows 50 amot tall. The next morning, go to the king, Mordechai, alav, and we'll go and we'll hang Mordechai. So you'll go to the mishteh, you'll go and you'll be a happy camper. Everything will be good, and you don't have to worry about this guy. He'll be killed. That's the end of it, right? You'll never have to think about him again. And so he's happy about this advice. So let's just pull it back here. Is anyone bothered by anything in this last pasuk over here, pasuk Yudalad? what Zeresh is, what says Vatomer lo Zeresh Ishto. Does anything stand out here about this pasuk as being a bit strange? It's okay. We're on Zoom. We don't all have to participate. I'm used to having some people, at least in person, who will answer my questions. So that's quite all right. So notice a few things. First of all, what is the order of operations? Compare pasuk Yudalad, compare the last verse and the second pasuk in this box, pasuk Yud. What is the order of operations between Zeresh and Ohavav, his friends?
It's opposite.
It's opposite. What do we think is going on here?
She's the one who's giving him the advice.
Okay, good. So it could be. Sorry, what was that?
It says Vatomer. There's only one person talking.
Correct, but it also says V'cho Ohavav, right? The pasuk definitely continues with V'cho. But you're right. It says Vatomer, and that Tomer. I mean, that she's taking the initiative. Good.
Is Nekeva Vatomer?
Yeah, that's the first flower. Yeah.
Correct. So what it almost seems to be implying here, if you will, is like he has all of his like closest friends and family together, and who's the one who's really the one who's leading the charge? It's Zeresh. Even though like sometimes maybe in this time period women were more in the background and she's kind of pushed aside relative to all the other friends who joined him and all his other close friends and advisors. But when it comes to offering the advice, who's the person who steps forward? It's none other than Zeresh herself. And here's the other thing that always kind of like sticks out of my head. Take a look at the next box number 4 for a minute. Is this idea of Zeresh so innovative? Like this is the pasuk that we quote as being the reason why Zeresh should be such a bad person, because she's the one who suggests to kill Mordechai. But is this like such an innovative idea to kill Mordechai? Look just a few chapters earlier in Perek Gimel, pasuk Hey, in chapter 3, verse 5, and box number 4 here. Vayar Haman ki ein Mordechai koreh mishtachava lo ve'emalei Haman chema. So this is not the first time. Meaning when we saw it in Perek Hey, in chapter 5, it's not the first time that we see Haman getting pretty angry about the situation. And so he sees it and he's just angry about it. He disdained to lay hands on Mordechai alone. He didn't want to just kill Mordechai because he thought to himself, if I just kill Mordechai, what's going to happen? There'll be some other Jew that will come around and really tick me off and really anger me. So Haman is already wise to the idea of going to kill all of the people of Mordechai, kill Mordechai. So what is this idea that suddenly that it comes to Haman, that when Haman hears this advice that's being offered by his wife, why suddenly does he think this is such great advice? He's already thought about this. This is nothing new, right? What is this satisfying? In what way should he now be happy for this advice? And in what way do we really blame Zeresh? Because in truth, Hamani had the idea first. Now,
it's immediate.
Say it again.
It's immediate. She says, put it up and we'll hang him tonight. So tomorrow you can go to the party.
Yeah, but she's also the only one who said to put up the 8s. And Perek Gimel, he doesn't say what he's going to do. He just says he's angry and he wants to do something.
Well, we know already that he has done a pour. He's done a lottery to wipe out the Jewish people.
But now not necessarily to hang him on, and not necessarily to hang Mordechai at that point.
No, not to hang Mordechai, but he already has set in the motion the plans to kill every Jew, including Mordechai. But I also want. I just want to also clue in back to pasuk Yudalad again in the previous box number 3. What is the instructions? Emor lamelech baboker, like in the morning, tell this to the king, and then they'll go and they'll hang Mordechai. So to be clear, Haman is not doing anything without the king's permission, right? You can't just go hanging people. I mean, I guess you could, but like, you don't just do that. And so the advice here is what? Go and speak to the king. And after you speak to the king, the next morning we're going to kill this guy. And then that night you'll go to the party, you'll have a good time. So it's the whole thing is it's a very strange, like we blame Zeresh for this advice, but in a sense, he already had the advice, he already had the idea. What is she adding that's so significant? Now let's just continue on real quickly because there's one other important part of the story here. about Zeresh. This is the only other part that we hear about Zeresh. She is like the ultimate supporting character. And that's in box number 5, says Perek Vav Pasuk Yud Aleph. So let's just set it up. What happens? So he takes the advice of Zeresh. Haman takes the advice, except he makes one small modification. Does he go the next morning to go visit Achashverosh? No. What does he do instead? He goes that night. He goes away. He goes that night to visit him. And as he's waiting outside, I always imagine him like kind of waiting outside in a creepy way. Like as he's waiting outside, what is Achashverosh doing on the other side of the wall? He's having a restless night of sleep. And that is the night that he goes and he asks for the Sefer HaZichronot. He asks for the book of remembrance of all the people who've done good. And this is the night that he remembers that a guy named Mordechai once saved his life from being killed by a bunch of traitors. And because Mordechai saved him, he's obviously very loyal. He needs to be able to be rewarded. And when he needs to be rewarded, so he turns to Haman and says, what should we do for a man who's deserving of great reward? And so this is where Haman thinks that, oh, wow, I'm going to get even more attributes and even more accolades. So I know what I'm going to do. This is what you should do. You should walk into the street. You should wear the king's clothes. And as we know, it reverses itself. And this is where we pick up in Pasuk Yud Aleph. He has to go and dress Mordechai. I cannot emphasize this enough. Just 10 psukim earlier, we're talking about how much the man hates him. Even though he has a plan to kill him with all the Jews, it's not enough. He needs to actually hang him faster. Such we do to a person who that the king wants to honor. Mordechai goes back to the king's gate. He goes back home and his head is covered in mourning. So just as two just points here. Number one, it's amazing. Think about if you're Mordechai. You have been sitting, sak ve'efer, you've been sitting literally in garments of mourning. In Shar HaMelech, sitting there crying, fasting, you're not moving, you're praying for the Jewish people. Suddenly it feels like a miracle has come forth, that you're being walked around, you've gotten the highest level of treatment. And what does he do? He returns to Shar HaMelech. He goes back. What does Haman do? He goes back to home also, but this time his entire mood has changed and he's covered in mourning. The Megillah and the Gemara in Megillah actually fills in the blanks here a little bit in box number 6. The Gemara here says that how are we meant to understand this? Like, what is this? What is actually happening here? So the Gemara explains that. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulty. The Gemara says, when he came down Haman's own road, past Haman's house, Chazite Barte de Kaima Agira. So Haman's daughter was standing on the roof and she saw everything was going on. And she thought to herself, who is obviously the person who's riding on the horse? Well, it must be my father. And if it is my father on the horse, who's the person who must be leading him? Obviously the person he hates more than anyone else. She obviously overheard the plan. Behind him is Mordechai. Who's the person who's sitting there? It's Mordechai, who's leading the horse. So what does she do? Shkala atzitza de beit hakisei. She goes and takes all the remnants of the chamber pot, and she throws it out and throws it onto the head of the person leading the horse, who is who? None other than her father. And when she looks down carefully and sees that it is her father, what does she do? She's so distressed at what she has done, she jumps and takes her own life. And he goes back, Mordechai, and continues to mourn and to fast. What does it mean that he goes back in mourning? Avel al bito. He was mourning about his daughter who had just died, and chafui rosh, and the fact that his head was covered due to what happened to him. He was full of filth from this story. That's what it means that his head was covered. But when he gets back home, back to box number 5, he tells Zeresh and again all of his friends. Notice the flip here. So it's Zeresh and now also all of his people, not the other way around. His advisors saved him, and Zeresh's wife. By the way, if this Mordechai guy is from the Jewish stock. Asher achilota alin po lefanav lo tuchal lo ki nafolti po lefanav. You're never going to be able to overcome him. He's Jewish. How are you going to ever think that you're going to be able to overcome him? You didn't tell us Mordechai was Jewish. Sorry, you can't do it. Odam Adam Rimimo. And the same time they're talking of Sarisi Amelch Agiu. Right as this happens, the king's eunuchs, the Sarisim, come. Now, can you imagine Haman's poor luck over here? Everything is falling apart. He comes home. I mean, it's a crazy thing. Now they tell him, oh, you didn't tell us that Mordechai was Jewish. Oh, yeah. You got no chance. I'm sorry. He's Jewish. There's no way you can possibly beat him. Like, can you imagine what's going on through Haman's head? Like, now you tell me, Zeresh? You're the one who suggested we kill him. So how do we make sense of Zeresh's behavior here? Was there a comment? So number one, like, what is happening here? Suddenly his advisors and his wife, in particular Zeresh, who made this suggestion, flips. Is that what this is? So I think that is one possible way that we can look at Zeresh. Zeresh is a fair weather wife. She supports her husband when he's on the way up, but when he's on the way down, and she sees literally that she's walking through the streets, maybe covered in feces. She's like, "Oh, this guy's a loser. I want nothing to do with him. Yeah, sorry, that was a bad idea. It's not going to work out for you." So one possibility is that she is a fair weather wife. One other possibility related to that is that I was thinking about this morning. That could be that when she flip flops in this way, that maybe this is tied to the Gemara, the story of her daughter. In other words, maybe what makes her like see the light and change her perspective is now she's lost her daughter and it's become very personal for her. And she realizes the tremendous cost of doing business and trying to, kill a Mordechai. He really is untouchable. And she says, I don't want any more part of this. That's definitely a possibility. But I want to explore at least two other ideas here about how we're supposed to make sense of Zeresh's behavior and her flip-flop over here. But before we do so, I want to just pause and see if anybody wants to offer their own interpretation or their own comment before we continue. Okay, let's continue. So another possibility about how to understand Zeresh goes back to asking a more fundamental question, which I apologize, I kind of skipped over on purpose, which is, there are many, many ways to kill a person, right? Why is it that Zeresh specifically suggests that we need to kill him via a gallows? What is it about a gallows that is a fitting way to take Mordechai's life? After all, as I said before, Haman already planned to wipe out the whole Jewish people. Everyone was allowed to kill the Jews on a certain day, which was Purim. So what is the significance of this? So the commentaries actually offer a lot of different possibilities. So take a look here at the Maharal, who has a commentary on the Megillah, the Or Chadash. So it says as follows, Yesh lahakshot, this is like 7 words in the first line. So you can ask, what kind of advice of this? Everybody knows this, right? And yet this is considered very good advice. And I want to skip ahead here. V'od kasha, lama amra. This is 4 lines down, right in the middle of the line. V'od kasha, another question. Lama amra yasa eitz gavoa 50 amah. Why does it have to be such a tall tree? Why does it got to be so tall, right? Davka, misparza. What's the significance here about the 50? And so he suggests here that Haman obviously knew, I'll just say it outside for the sake of time, Haman obviously knew that he could kill Mordechai in any which way, right? But the question comes into what would be the most dignified way, right? What's the most dignified way for him to kill Mordechai? Now, one thing that he could do is that he could go and just go up to him and kill him. Or he can ask someone else to kill him. But what would be a more respectable way for a man of Haman's prestige to do it? So this comes into the notion of the gallows, because a big gallows, when you hang someone like that, that indicates that such a person deserved a terrible crime, or committed a terrible crime and deserved a very public punishment. And in fact, we see other midrashim and other interpretations as to what the significance was specifically when it specifically came to creating the gallows. For example, in Esther Rabbah in the Medrash, you see that Zeresh actually gives the best advice, right? She is the best. She knows that no one gives advice like Zeresh. I feel like that's like a song, like Zeresh gives the best advice, right? Or maybe you could say differently, nobody knew how to convince her husband like Zeresh, like she just really had a way. And think about it. According to Zeresh's interpretation, what's the significance here of murdering him via a gallows by hanging? Well, think about it. The Jewish people are impervious to all other types of murder. Avram Avinu was thrown into a fiery furnace. How did that work out? He was okay, right? Hanan and Mishael and Azariah were also thrown into a fiery furnace. He was also saved. Daniel is thrown into a lion's den. He's also impervious. Yosef is thrown into jail. He also is impervious to that. So like, there's so many ways that you try to kill the Jewish people, you can't kill them. They're like, you just can't get rid of them. And so instead, you throw them in the wilderness, right? The Jewish people spent years in the wilderness. Jewish people survived there. You can't just throw them out of town either. So she says, what's the one way that no one's ever tried to kill a Jewish person? Well, let's hang them. And so that's the idea that Haman said, wow, that's so smart. I never thought about that. Yeah, that's what we'll have to do, because all the other ways will never work. And the Malbim takes this idea kind of like a step further. And he says, and Rav Yonatan Grossman also has a great article on VBM Torah about this as well. I'm happy to share it with anybody who's interested. But essentially it says as follows, Yatsu v'chachma sheyuchal linkom b'Mordechai v'chol zeh lo yuchshav lo leha'ader kavod. Everything here was that to make sure that nothing would be beneath his honor. If the only reason why you're going to hang Mordechai is because he wasn't bowing down, that wouldn't be a very fitting punishment, right? That wouldn't be appropriate. Just because a person didn't bow down to you, that's a reason to do it. But sometimes we hang people to create fear amongst the general public. So we hang them really high so everybody sees them. And Rav Yonatan Grossman explains that this is actually not the first time we find somebody hanged in the Megillah. Right. Who else gets hanged? Bigtan and Teresh. And what are they? What is the reason they are hanged?
They tried to kill the king.
Treason. They are hung for treason in particular. And so in other words, Rabbi Grossman suggests, what is the appropriate punishment for treason and being a conspirator against the king? It's hanging. That's how you kill such a person. So what is it? What is the story that Haman is trying to tell? Like the Malbim said, it would not work. You can't just go to the king and say, listen, king, I want to hang this guy Mordechai because he's not bowing down to me. It's really annoying. Like, what are you talking about? No. What he says instead, what he wants to tell the king is, this man is a threat. He's a conspirator. He's a traitor. He needs to be killed like a Bigtan and Teresh. And not only that, but he's such a problem. We should make an example of him. We got to put him on a 50-amma tall gallows. And so this is perhaps what Zeresh is suggesting to him. So how then would this information help us better understand Zeresh's flip-flop, if you will? How do we make sense of this idea that Zeresh suddenly switches gears? Let's think to what happened that very night. By the way, he doesn't listen to her advice. He goes that night and not the morning to the king. Who is the last person in the entire Persian Empire who would be possibly accused of being a traitor or of treason? Mordechai. In a million years. So the very night that Haman comes to accuse Mordechai of treason, he is shown to be the most loyal subject. And so Zeresh, it's not that she flip-flops and leaves her husband high and dry, but rather she has this realization that the plan has fallen apart. The whole premise of the plan was to hang him and to show that Mordechai was treacherous and that he was a conspirator against the king and he was deserving to die as a traitor, and not just because he kind of annoyed Haman in this way by not bowing down. But it was more than that. It was that he was a traitor. That's why he deserved death. But instead, what ends up happening is, as soon as it becomes clear that Mordechai is literally the most loyal subject in the entire kingdom, Zeresh realizes the entire plan has falls apart, and we can no longer hang Mordechai. And what's the great irony? Not just that Haman gets hung on his actual gallows that he built for somebody else, but he's hung for conspiracy. And Achashverosh believes that he's trying to kill him, Achashverosh, and his wife Esther. He is killed as a traitor, as a conspirator against the kingdom. The very same thing that he was trying to sneakily accuse Mordechai of. And so this perhaps can give us a better insight into Zeresh, that it's not so much that Zeresh is a flip-flopper, but just that Mordechai can no longer be accused as a traitor after this moment. And so that helps us understand why she possibly flips. So that's one possibility. The only problem, not the only problem, one of the challenges with this approach is if we go back to our sources of the Psukim themselves, you'll notice that what is the reason that Zeresh gives for the flip? Why suddenly does she change her mind? Because he's Mizera HaYehudim. Because where does he come from? He's Jewish. Now, if you want to suggest that it's about the fact that the plan has fallen apart and she can't actually accuse him of being a traitor anymore, so what does it mean that he's Mizera HaYehudim? How do we make sense of that? So with that, I want to suggest another interpretation that, at least in my mind, I think helps see Zeresh as a quite important character in the broader Megillah in terms of telling what I think is really perhaps the true theme of the entire Megillah. So let's just think about the following question. Let me think of how the best way to do this. What is the significance of building a gallows that's 50 amot high? Why is that like I get it, it's got to be tall. Let's just do some quick math. Let me pull out my phone here for a second. So
It's
an
100
amma,
feet. That's very visible from many places.
yeah, but let's just figure out how visible. An amma is like
2 feet.
I don't know, 20 inches, 21 inches or so, like, right? So 21 inches
We're
times
talking
by,
about 95 feet high.
yeah, so like, exactly, yeah. So it's like 95 feet. I just want to, I like to think of things in terms of sports. So it's like 10 basketball hoops on top of each other. That's like not just like a little tall. That's like really tall. Like if you wanted to put someone up really high, you could do that at 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet, but you can do it at almost 100 feet. That's really significant. But what I think is kind of cool though, is that this number, 50 amot, we actually find it in other places. So for example, take a look in Breshit. What are some other times that we find this number, 50 amot, in the entire Tanakh? So in Breshit, Noach is commanded by God to make a teva. This I should make the teva. You should put pitch on the inside and the out. These are the dimensions. It should be 300 cubits in its length, 50 cubits in its width, and its height should be 30 cubits. So we see here 50 cubits. We also see 50 amot. We also see 50 amah, 50 amot elsewhere. Take a look in Malachim, another place we find it. In the description of, this is a great chapter, by the way, chapter 7, Perek Zayin in Malachim Aleph, a lot of good stuff here. When Shlomo goes to build the Beis HaMikdash, he comes in, it takes him 13 years to build his palace. And Vayiven at Beit Ya'ar Havanon, Mea Ama Arko, he built the Lebanon forest house, 4 rows of cedar columns, okay? V'chamishim Ama Rochba, how wide was it? Its breadth was 50 cubits. So we see again here in Tanakh, a pretty significant, the first one was the Teva, and here's another pretty significant structure in the history of the world and the Jewish people, which is the Beis HaMikdash itself, which was also had a width here of 50 amot. Now, when we ask ourselves about Purim in general, We say, we want to know about Purim. Why do we call it Purim? So we call it Purim. The name Purim is because of the poor, because of not the poor, meaning people without poverty, but poor, meaning the lottery, because the lottery that Haman did. Now, when we name holidays, how does it usually work? How do we name holidays? Well, the normal way we name the holidays, it has often to do with like the action or the mitzvah of the day. So think about what's the name for the holiday where we sit in a sukkah? Sukkot. What's the name of the holiday that's coming up in 5 weeks that everyone should be getting worried for? It's not just Pesach. How's the Torah call it? Chag HaMatzot. So what does it Purim have anything to do with? Why do we call it? So maybe you can say this is a rabbinic holiday, it's a D'Rabbanan, so we don't do it based on what we do. It's about the origin instead of the holiday. And the origin of the holiday, like Hanukkah, right? So Hanukkah is also a rabbinic holiday. The name comes from not from the action or the mitzvah of the day, but it comes based on how it happened. So what do we know about lotteries? Well, there's actually a lot to say about lotteries. Our very own Rabbi Sam Berkowitz gave a great share about lotteries this past Shabbos between Mincha and Maariv. You can speak to him for his source sheets. But what do we know about lotteries in Tanakh? There are a few times that lotteries are used. So I'm going to use like one example. A lottery was used in order to divvy up the land in Eretz Yisrael. Now, this is like there's a lot to unpack about like that lottery and that system and all that. But again, I'm oversimplifying a very complex idea because I'm just trying to use it to prove a point here. That generally, when it comes to lotteries in Tanakh, anytime we find them, when are they used? They're used to help get at what Hashem really wants. So we do a lottery to divvy up the land because we want to know exactly how did God want us to divvy up the land. So now let's go to Haman. Of all the things to do, why does Haman do a lottery? Why doesn't he just choose a date? What's the significance of a lottery? So you have to remember the Medrash describes Haman as being an incredibly religious person. Some even suggest that one of the reasons Mordechai won't bow down to him is why? Because he's wearing avodah zarah. He's literally a very, very religious person. So Haman, much like the other people throughout Jewish history and world history who are using a lottery to get at what is it that some divine being, in our case God, wanted, Haman is doing exactly the same thing. Haman is trying to ascertain what is the divine will, and this is why he does a lottery. Now, why is that significant? It's significant because it shapes the entire story of the Megillah as really it being a religious story. It's not just a story of political prowess and political maneuvering by Esther and Mordechai, but there's now a very deeply religious piece involved as well, because Haman is motivated by this deep religious sense of choosing this date, that this must be something that's going to happen. Now the Medrash fills in the blanks. Why does Zeresh suggest that it should be 50 amot tall? So Medrash says, where do you get a piece of wood that big? You got to go up to like the redwoods to get a piece of wood that tall for a gallows, unless you took it from someplace else. Unless you took it and you went to Har Ararat itself and you took this religious totem of the actual Teva because you were such a religious person that you wanted to use. What are you going to use? You're going to use a gallows that's 50 amah. We're going to use a special gallows from the Teva of Noach to murder this Jew. And if maybe not that, the Medrash says, maybe what do you use? You went to the Beis HaMikdash itself, which was destroyed. And we said last week that Achashverosh and possibly Vashti played an important role in not rebuilding it and preventing its being rebuilt. You go and take a piece of wood, some of that cedar wood that's 50 amot, 50 amah, you take it, and that's what you build up to hang Mordechai. And so when we see it in this perspective, it changes the entire Zeresh narrative. At the very beginning, what is it that Zeresh is suggesting? Zeresh is telling Haman, go show how powerful their God is and how powerful our God is, really. This is a religious story. Go take some religious totem that's of great significance to the Jewish people. Go take it and use it to go kill this. This will teach them real good. It's not just that everyone will see it. We're going to use some religious article as well. And then what happens when the entire story flips on its head? What is Zeresh's great understanding that she didn't understand before? Now Zeresh realizes, Mizera HaYehudim. He really is untouchable. these Jews, as they have told us through generations, their God is really that powerful. God has a history of protecting the Jewish people. It's no longer, the Megillah is no longer just some political issues between Haman and Mordechai, but it takes on this deep religious tone instead. And the lottery, and in particular, Zeresh's role here plays a critical role in helping us see that the Megillah is really a religious story and not a political one. And in fact, take a look in the last source here, the Gemara and Megillah over here. The Gemara says as follows, so karilu ohavav, the karilu chachamav. You'll notice that how is he going back to those psukim, who are the ones who says mizera hayudim, that anyone who comes from a Jewish stock can't be touched? It's no longer his friends, but the Megillah describes them as chachamav, wise people. Why? What's the significance? So Amar Yochanan, kol hamer devar b'chachma. Any person who says even a little bit of truth in their, a little bit of, has any type of words of wisdom, afil b'umot ha'olam nikra chacham. Anyone who says something that is deep and profound, even if they themselves are from the rest of the world, they're not Jewish, nikra chacham, we call such a person wise. And we understand this from the pasuk. In other words, you thought that you could hurt him. He's a Jewish person, and his friends and Zeresh are no longer just friends. They become wise. Go back to the pasuk and see that the Megillah here is so subtle. It's calling them wise because they understand. They have this epiphany. It's not that Zeresh is some fair weather wife. She becomes wise like everybody else about how powerful Hashem is and the way that Hashem always protects his people. God has a history of protecting the Jewish people and always does it. And this is why the entire Megillah, in a sense, is really a religious issue. And from this perspective and from this angle, when we think towards Zeresh and her story, and we see her as a supporting actor. So what is the significance of her? So she really helps us create the motivation to understand the overall story. And we said last week, a great supporting actor, what they do better than anything else is help move other actors and the narrative forward in a significant way. And without Zeresh's piece over here about building a gallows that's 50 amot, and bringing home just how religious the whole story really is, perhaps that important theme and detail would have been overlooked. So we will stop right here. I appreciate everyone making the effort to join us via Zoom, and apologize about not being able to be in person tonight. But again, join us Monday night, this coming Monday night, for part number 3, our final part before we get to, which we'll get to Charbona, our last character that we'll explore. And then also please join us on Purim night, which will be just a really, really fun night. And if you are coming on Purim night, I expect to see you in costume as well. So thank you all so much and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.